All right. So yeah, we're funded by le Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois de l'expression anglaise. This is a partnership also with SEAS, which is an incubator out of Concordia University. And of course, RDN, our fiscal and financial sponsors and parent company. So yeah, business plan writing 101. This is quite a dense topic. So I'm not sure we'll be able to squeeze it all in 1 hour. So I think the way we'll do this is if something is of interest of you, let me know and we can dive deeper into it. And otherwise I'll try to just touch on everything. Oh, oh my gosh, that's funny. Here we are. So slide 1. So usually when you're in like the business planning phase, you're still kind of clarifying your concept, refining your business idea into something that becomes more feasible over time. So this involves identifying the opportunity. So usually this is in consultation with your community to ensure that you're providing something that's needed and meaningful. Then it's kind of a reflective piece of assessing like your own skills, experience, and finding your co-founding team to help you fill in the gaps and get like a solid base of people behind the idea and the opportunity. And then also assessing the resources and the capacity of your team to take on the project. So all of this determines the fitness of your concept. And over time becomes clarified to your actual concept and business idea. So the entrepreneurial process is threefold, right? So there's the development phase, where kind of what we just went through is you're identifying the opportunity and forming your co-founding team. And then it takes a lot of determination because starting up an enterprise on average takes around 3 years. So of course there are exceptions, but that's the average. So it takes people really dedicated to the idea to be able to carry it forward. And then lastly, also management. So even before you launch your organization, you need to know how it's going to function. So the key like functional business areas of operations, marketing, finance, figuring out who's going to be in charge of what, and if you can sustain your operations that way. So the basics of a business model, when you're still kind of clarifying your concept, is you have to figure out like operations wise, what your supply chains are, the sustainability of it, both financially and practically speaking. And then your offering, right? So is this something that people want? Is it attractive for the market right now? Is it unique? And then also the monetization. So what is your revenue model? What sales goals do you need to be able to reach in order for the business to sustain itself? So once you have your business idea, then you can start considering different models. So because we are the social economy like development network, I'm highlighting here different social economy models, which are connected through the fact that they have democratic processes built into a collectively owned structure. So there's worker cooperatives where all the worker members own it, consumer cooperatives where the people who are using or buying the good or service are the owners of it. Then there's producer. So this is often like artisans coming together to help get their goods to market. And then there's solidarity cooperatives, which is a combination of all three, but producer being more so support member in that scenario. And then of course, nonprofits. So nonprofits can generate revenues and operate the same way as a typical corporation does. And in fact, they're even incorporated under the same Corporations Act. So I apologize for the animals here. I've got a little bird tweeting and the dog is, I'm gonna have an office next month, but anyways, apologize for that. So this might be something you've seen before. It's the business model canvas. Business model canvas is kind of when you're still refining your business ideas, it's a tool that people use to help develop some of the core functional areas. So usually this is done on like a big piece of paper on a big whiteboard, and then people kind of write out all of the things here. Yeah, so not too much to say about this, because we'll be going into all of these aspects in more depth. So the canvas that we just saw, that is more for like pre-startup, like so if you're the ideation phase, but then once you know what you're doing, you have your business idea, and then you're starting to look for financing and wanting to advance on that. That's when you start to actually want to write the business plan. So the business plan has 6 key sections, which we'll go over in detail. And so this is how we'll frame the rest of the workshop. Again, if you have questions, feel free to just jump in. So first is your executive summary, which is actually usually done at the very end of your business plan. But often it's also framed as kind of like your elevator pitch. So ideally it's maximum 1 page. It touches on who you are, who's your business, who's the target audience. It talks about what is your product or service, what are the goals for your business, when you'll be implementing your timeline to achieve your goals, what your exit strategy is sometimes, and where your business is located, why, which is a big one. So why do people want to buy from you? Like why are you specifically in this business? And then how are you going to structure your business? How are you going to achieve your goals, and how are you going to picture your company in the future? So your vision statements and those kinds of things. So your elevator pitch, which is a part of your executive summary, is again done last, but also sometimes the only thing that investors or bankers or those types of folks will actually read. So because it's the only thing people will actually read sometimes, like they'll read it and look for red flags within that. So it needs to touch on everything. So your executive summary needs to describe the business opportunity. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? And it shouldn't just be like a one-off thing. It needs to be like a very clear problem. I'm sure you guys have seen the like commercials where someone's they're making a problem out of nothing, and it's like that's not an issue. Like, so it needs to be a very clear problem, and then you need to explain how your business is going to be serving and solving that problem. So then also your target market. Also, hi Talia, thanks for joining us here.
Hey,
we're quite a small group here, so if you feel like jumping in and asking questions, please do. I'm going to mostly just be skimming on topics, and then if you want to dive deeper into it, then just unmute yourself and we can do that.
Amazing. I will be like tuned out for the next 3 minutes, but then I will be rejoined.
So yeah, the describing your target market, and yeah, so also your business model, your marketing strategy. So we'll go into the 4 P's of the marketing as well. And your financial situation. So usually this is only 2 sentences or so, but you'll say we need this amount of money to start up and require this amount of loans and this amount of equity, and you just kind of quickly summarize your financial situation, and then your implementation plan, which is also something we'll jump into later. So yeah, executive summary, you do it last. It's very important to be very concise. This is usually something you get everyone on the team to look at because it's one of the more important pieces to the puzzle. Next is the business description. So this is quite a dense section and probably the bulk of the marketing plan or the business plan. So includes often your mission, vision, values, your industry, trends, target market, competition, all these things. So yeah, so in your business description, usually they want to know that you have tested your product. So and you have like a very clear conception of what your product is. So there is prototype development. So you test it. If it's a food, or if it's something else, you need to actually make it. You need to like do it. You have to make sure it's shelf stable. You have to make sure it's safe. You have to do all these things. So first there's the prototype development, then you test it in small groups. You get the costing, and that costing also will help you determine a lot of your other financial projections and things. And then often you also go out to your consumers and give out free samples and try to gauge that. So this is all in your product and service development, which then enables you to have enough like data and sample to actually describe your product. So in the kind of entrepreneurial mindset, you should always be thinking about framing your product or service in the terms of solving the problem, which in this scenario here, so you're saying the features of the product should be based from the benefits, which should be derived from the needs sought from your customer. Right. So always kind of keeping in mind that your product needs to actually connect to your customer. So in your product development, usually what is important is that you have something unique and that you're providing value with that, right? So this is called your unique value proposition, which is it's a combination of things. So it's what specific pain points are you trying to solve? It's also like, what insights do you have about the industry? What are you passionate about? It's what resources and capabilities you have that are superior to other people that are doing this. And then what differentiates you to others operating the sector. So sometimes in the business plan, this will actually be written out as a separate section underneath the product description to really highlight some of these key factors. So again, this is another way to look at it. It's a nice little visual. That's why it's in here, but it's kind of repeating myself. So features based off needs, the benefits, the experience, all of these things should come from the psychology of the people that you're trying to serve, right? So their needs, fears, wants. Ideally not fears, but sometimes fear can be a good motivator. So what is uniqueness? Because uniqueness is something that's often thrown around quite a bit. So there's three kind of factors that we use or people use in general to question if something is unique. So is it relevant to your target group? So if you're not actually sure if something is what they want, then you're not so for example, like packaging, right? So if you have a product but the packaging of it is terrible, then it could be not relevant to the consumer's actual experience of it. So thinking holistically about how you're providing the product or service. Another factor of uniqueness is difficult to copy. So if this is something that someone else can just start doing tomorrow, then it's unlikely that it's not actually a unique selling point or a unique value proposition, because someone else can just decide like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'm going to do that tomorrow. So yeah. And then the other thing is differentiated capabilities. So differentiation strategy is usually developed by providing customers with something that is distinct and different from other things that exist. So the main objective is to increase your competitive advantage, which is usually done through analyzing strengths and weaknesses of other products or services that are currently available. So then we have our industry analysis and background. Within the industry analysis, there's a lot of things to be considering. So kind of touched on it a moment ago, but ease of entry. So companies that are already operating in industry will enjoy a competitive advantage over newcomers. However, their products, like their profits will tend to slow down unless they block new entries to that market. So often, that's when lobbying happens, or patents and copyrights, or people invest heavily into building customer loyalty. Then there's the power of the suppliers and the buyers. So if you're very dependent on a small number of suppliers, can you hear her do that? Is that distracting? No? Okay. So the power of your suppliers and buyers. So if your consumers have strong bargaining power, or if your suppliers, you're very dependent on one person, then the supplier could have the power to dictate quantities and prices and conditions and things that and then availability substitutes similarly to ease of entry, but different in the sense that it's something could be replaceable. It doesn't have to be the exact same, but it can be substituted. So like orange juice or a kombucha to matcha. Like there's these new drinks, right? They're kind of both like niche products, but I would say they're similarly substitutable. And then so when you're doing your industry analysis, you're also looking at the rules and regulations around the product. So the competitiveness of the market. Are there a lot of like big players that have been doing this for a long time that are like directly in competition with you? Trends as well. So there's a lot of great like researching. I'll provide a list after this where you can research industry trends. But yeah, typically this will help you gauge what if a market is mature, or if it's a new market, or these kinds of things. You'll look at the industry trends, and of course technological factors. So yeah, all these things are kind of included in your industry analysis.
What do you mean by technological factors, Olivia?
Yeah, so technological factors, this I think applies more so for
building a product.
Yeah, if it's an actual, because I know your project. So I think maybe a technological factor that would be relevant to Bar Milton Park would be online ordering, right? Like that the channel of reaching customers through online ordering is a technological factor that you would consider in like the industry of like to-go consumption.
And like similarly to apply like availability of substitutes to something like a bar, which isn't like a single product, would that just be referring to like replacing a certain drink with another? Like the supplier and buyer power would be about the specific things that we're purchasing for the bar?
Yeah, so I mean, availability,
or would it not really be as relevant?
Yeah, so availability substitutes would be, I guess, the proximity of other like similar products. So availability
being other bars.
Other bars, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So another tool that's used often is within your industry analysis is you would look at it through the PEST lens, which is your political factors, economic factors, social factors, and technological factors. So political factors, your policies and laws and taxes, other tariffs, these kinds of things, if you're doing exporting, importing kind of things. Economic factors would be your exchange rates, inflation, unemployment rates, these kinds of things. Social factors would be population growth, health consciousness, more cultural aspects, these kinds of things. Career attitudes, and then technological again. So automation, rates of change in technology, because some industries are rapidly changing, and other kind of R&D activities. So when we're talking about your competitiveness, typically it's laid out through like a matrix, where you can compare different product attributes. So you would compare different attributes of your product with your competitors. So this could be if your unique value proposition is based off of having low pricing, then one of these traits would be low pricing. Right? If one of your product attributes is so I'm trying to think of an example. It's not about the bar. But yeah, so low price. So anyways, anything that's a key feature of your product that you're carrying throughout and championing in your business plan, you would then use that to compare to your competitors in kind of a matrix style. So now that you've kind of described your industry, you know what your product is. This is now you start to get into the market and your market share. So this is often how you would say like the opportunity or the interest. So you would see the total available market. And then you would say, okay, so the Canadian market is this big. Realistically, we're bound by regional context. So the serviceable market that we can reach is here. And then from that, you would say, okay, actually the people we're actually wanting to target is only a fraction of that. So it gets smaller and smaller. And then you say, okay, we want to actually only capture this like 5% of the market share, because the other 95% is going to go to, I don't know, some multinational conglomerate or something like that. So you when you're building this argument, it's usually based off of various assumptions. So I can give you guys an example if that would be interesting or helpful. I think Talia may have seen this example, but you use key data points, and then you carry the assumptions forward to find out exact market share. So you could say if we captured 2.5 of the market share, that would enable us to make $5.3 million of revenues per year. And then so that's how you kind of create a financial argument based off of the market share. So broadly speaking, that is the business description, which then kind of lends itself, as we're starting to talk about markets, into the marketing plan. We call it sales and marketing plan. So within that, first, you describe your target market. So this is based off of social, economic, psychological factors. And here's some good examples of that. More specifically though, our target market is usually segmented. So you'd say you would get a demographic segmentation, psychographic, geographic, value-based, persona, and behavioral. So demographic, ethnicity, race, age, education, income. Psychographic is like personality, opinions, political affiliations. Geographic, pretty straightforward. But based off of your current context, is it suburban? Is it rural? Is it a specific town? Is it a whole region? Being very specific with that. So value-based, So, you know, if you're focused on organic or fair trade practices, or you're operating as a cooperative, these kinds of like factors that can help you value signal. And then behavioral. So this is a bit more different. So it's like the usage rate, like how frequently are people actually going to be using your product? Is it something that people tend to get a lot of loyalty to? Is it, yeah, so these kinds of more nuanced things. And then there's also like persona. So this is, I guess, your psychological kind of background, which will become more clear in a second. So typically you take all that information and refine it down till you have an idea of who your ideal customer is. And so this would be your primary target market, and then you could have your secondary target market, and then sometimes even a tertiary target market, but typically we focus on the primary ideal customer. So we take all that information, and typically what they like to see is like a sample customer profile, right? So this is an example of one. You'd say women, age, yeah, I'm not sure if we have to go through all of this, but I think you guys get the point of it here. So the basics of the marketing plan, this maybe sounds repetitive, but the marketing plan is a little bit different. And it's usually based around the 4 Ps. So product, price, place, and promotion. So product, as we've described the product and the business, when we're talking about that in the marketing plan context, sometimes that'll include things like packaging, right? And the overall consumer experience. So from describing the product from a marketing perspective. Pricing, so how much are you charging? How does that impact your customers, how they view the brand? And also that includes like an analysis of your pricing strategy. Place, so where are you promoting your goods? How do people find information about it? Where are you located? These kinds of things. And then promotion. So promotion is the most in-depth one typically. You'll pick a handful of promotional strategies and then detail certain tactics that you would use for that. So we won't get too much into the marketing plan, but I did want to just highlight a point about pricing. So pricing is very important, and there's a number of factors that have to go into discerning the pricing that you'll go with. So the cost to make it. So this is typically you'd get that in your prototyping. The amount of profit desired. So usually you'd look at like industry margins, and you would say, okay, so typically for the restaurant service industry, there is a 40% markup. So that's the industry standard. So that would be kind of how you would discern the markup and the profit that is required to float the rest of the business. So other objectives, right? So this is back to our sustainability, and how much does that cost, you know? And then what price do other people charge for similar products? So you could, within that analysis, sometimes you're a price follower, so you're following the price of the market, or you can be a price setter. So when you're setting the price, usually that's because of other factors, but you would then not be following what the other prices are doing, other people are doing in the same market. And then this is an important one, actually, your customer's willingness to pay. So sometimes what they'll ask you to do is actually go and survey people and say, what are you willing to pay for X? And you have to go get a bunch of people. And then, you know, sometimes it looks like a graph of like, you know, people are willing to pay $4 for a soup. And then, so if you're going to be charging $6, then it doesn't really, it's not a very good argument. and then you kind of need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate what how to lower the costs or things like that. So that's broadly speaking, the sales and the marketing plan. I didn't create anything about promotion, but is there anything else back on there that you want to touch on in more depth? No, all good. All right. So operations plan. Usually there is, so it's a business location. So you would do like a geographical assessment of that, so your business location, your equipment needs, and your suppliers. So those are 3 key things that you would kind of put at the very beginning of your operations plan. And then you would get into the organizational structure, some key procedures and things like that. So for today, we're going to focus more on the structure. So this is you would call this a line organizational structure, which is typical of what you would see in a lot of industries, actually. So, these would be like your floor supervisors, and then you have the employees, and they report to the director, and then there's a board, and it's a very, very hierarchical structure. So, I mean, there are pros to it, that there's less time for decision making, simplifies relationships because people already know that it's a one-way information stream, right? It's not, things aren't going back and forth. But I think there's a pretty big push away from these kinds of structures, specifically because the employees here don't have a lot of upward mobility. Maybe there's not a lot of like training or professional service like offers for them to gain more knowledge or expertise, because it is very segmented in that way. So this is actually from a business plan that I had written, but this would be considered a cross-functional team structure. So cross-functional in the sense, so you can see here, there's 5 different elements of the organization, and then the different people are working together. So these are like maybe committees, and then that enables everyone to work together across different like aspects of the organization. So this kind of structure does also have like some challenges, but it really does enable like team members to work together and make decisions regarding the organization in a more vertical way. So each person is considered an expert at what they do, and then they work together with other people. And so it does require coordination and often a lot of like informal relationships to kind of carry it. But in my experience, this kind of structure is one of the more fulfilling to be a part of. And really, I think it depends when you're creating your organizational structure, what kind of like leadership style you're wanting to promote within your organization. So if you want a more traditional leadership style, so if you're okay with hierarchy, you see the organization more as a machine. It's like, information flows one way, right? These kinds of things. If you assume people need to be told what to do, or maybe the circumstances you're within require that, or yeah. So and then if you believe one person can really carry it, versus a collective leadership model where you see the organization more as a system of like connected networks. Decision making can be shared or rotated, through board of directors or however. And then, the assumption is that people are inherently capable and can be trusted to do the right thing. And success comes from diverse perspectives and skills. So they're kind of some of the value alignment that helps you decide what is the best organizational structure. Then when we're talking about procedures, so often they'll actually want to know how decisions are being made. So this is again from the business plan that I referenced, where, so something starts, this is for a media organization, right? So how does something go from a story idea to being live and going across the platform, right? So the process of like, yes, no, who's making this decision, how is what are the procedures of the organization to enable the output, right? So if you're in a more like mechanical, technical type of organization, this is also something that they want to be aware of. So yeah, another thing to be considering within your procedures is your channel strategy, right? So this is, I guess, kind of, maybe this slide should have come before the other one, I think. But so yeah, how are you reaching your customers, right? Is it a direct sale? Are you're the person who's created, this is like maybe Etsy. I mean, they use a third party actually. So yeah, if you're directly selling off of your own website, this is you selling to your customer. If you're using a third party, or like a salesperson, it could be you, that person, then your customer. Retail, so like if you're creating a good and then you sell it through another retail, then you'd be using the retailers. And then sometimes, you're selling to a big distributor, and then that requires a salesperson, a customer, and sometimes you directly export. So these are some examples. It should be noted though, every single time there's like a person or one of these brown squares here, golden squares, it's taking part of your margin and also increasing the price for the consumer. So in the ideal world, you want to reduce as many of the channels or the intermediaries from you getting your product to your customer. So that's the basics of the operation plan. I think I did just skim over the some of the introductory elements that are typically covered in there. So that your business location and those kinds of things. Are there any questions on the operations plan? All right, full steam ahead. So people and management. So this is actually quite an important thing because often if you've seen Dragon's Den or something, they like to actually invest in people. I mean, ideas are important, but it's often the people that are carrying it. And that's described usually in your management team. So this is just a generic slide. But how you would do this often is you would say, okay, there's 4 key people that are carrying it. And this person is going to be the general coordinator. This person's going to specialize in finance. This person's going to edit, so you have the person, you humanize the person, you say, this is their background, this is what they're good at, this is their experience. And they're going to do this at the organization. That's going to be their role. So having very clear connection of who's doing what and what qualifies them to do that, right? So that's really what they're looking for. Also, so in your you kind of pitching that you're the right people, right? You say like, okay, we have all of the people, we have the expertise around the table. We're a cohesive team. We have the right capabilities, the right networks to carry this project, right? We have the right technology, right? So sometimes it's an intellectual property or other kind of assets. The right assets. We have a strong brand identity. We have the ability to acquire a lot of financial capital. And then also the right process. So this is more nuanced, but for example, so this is your distribution channel strategy. but also could be, you know, if your business, if you have a business idea, but it's not structured in the right way, people might kind of look at you funny. They'd be like, okay, well, everything sounds great, but why are you trying to be a user cooperative? Like, wouldn't this makes more sense as a nonprofit? So making sure you have the right like organizational structures and processes in place to also carry things forward. Within this also, you could lean into some key partners. So especially if there's a less experienced management team, you could talk about some key partnerships. So marketing, you could have cross-promotional or opportunities for shared growth. Resource, so you tap into their suppliers or similar, maybe there's opportunities to save time through like sharing bookkeepers or HR processes or these kinds of things. So sharing resources. Channel, so maybe sometimes you guys are selling your goods together, or yeah, logistical efficiencies around getting your goods to the suppliers. Financial, you know, sometimes people just give you money, and then it's a great partnership to highlight. And then yeah, suppliers. So often it's better to make multi-year commitments with suppliers, so you'll get a better deal. And then if you have you could consider that a partnership if it's a multi-year supplying contract. And then getting into the finance and action plan. So putting it all together, right? So now we have, you have at this point in the business plan, you have a pretty good idea of what the cost is to start the company, right? So you have the costing of your product figured out. You know how much people need to be paid. You know how much it's going to cost to produce, and then you use all of that information to figure out if it's actually feasible, right? So putting it all together, say, okay, well, we will need actually an extra 30K to float from when we open up until we like ramp up our sales. So that feasibility element needs to be included in the cost of your company. So more specifically, actually, maybe I'll go to the slide for no, okay. Yeah, so yeah, feasibility. So in your financial planning, it's good to ensure that you're like tapping into as many revenue streams as possible. So, you know, this is some of the, actually, I think this is all of them that I was able to find. So I did quite a bit of research on this. So production, if you're actually producing something, you know, producing food, producing goods, whatever. Licensing, so if you have intellectual property, or even if you're renting out your space, that would kind of count as licensing because you'd be the leaseholder and they'd be subletting from you. The freemium model, so you give something up for free and then that gets them invested in your enterprise or organization. And a lot of apps use the freemium model, right? Advertising, so this is often like media organizations or other kind of online companies using advertising, which honestly is very small margins and not something that you should lean on as like a primary revenue source. Most of the media organizations have actually moved into a membership model now. So it's a membership subscription that you get, and then they still have advertising on top of that, but it's not a big enough revenue source for them to lean on solely. Membership model is great. It's done in different ways. So a lot of nonprofits and cooperatives too. You have a membership base, and then sometimes you'll have like social pricing based off of that. So if you become a member, you get 10% off or something, right? And that's the incentive for you to become a member. And there's the markup model, so retail, these kinds of things. And then the nonprofit model. So that is the classic grant hunting year after year to try to float the operation. So yeah, within your financial planning, it's good to have a mix of a couple of these. Maybe you're going to be getting Canada Summer Jobs every year, so that's one grant that you're getting, but you're also going to be renting your space, and you're also going to be producing goods and services, so all of these things need to be considered. So within your financing plan, I think actually I want to show you this here. Yeah, so your financing plan usually starts with your startup cost assessment. So all the equipment that you need, all of these things. Then you go into like a profit and loss statement, which is a summary of your cash flow. So your cash flow is typically a 3-year projection of a monthly basis, saying this is the salary we need, these are the costs we're going to incur. And you do that over 3 years. And typically about 1.5 to 2 years is where you'll reach your break-even point. And then, yeah, so your cash flow statements are then summarized into an annual format to show your annual profit and loss projections. And then, yeah, some other things, I would say the last 3 are optional. They're not always required, but your marginal cost assessment, which is done, as we mentioned, through like right when you're doing your prototyping and your pricing and all these things, you can break it down further here into your marginal cost assessment. Sometimes like they'll even ask like, okay, what are the recipes? How many ingredients go into that? Like this is when you really get into the nitty gritty of the costing. And then your risk assessment. So this is often towards the end as well of like, you could say, well, if we're going to be breaking even in 2 years, it could be risky if we don't reach our sales targets by this year. So yeah, pretty straightforward, but taking all this financial information and then summarizing it to provide like a risk assessment. And then another thing that's sometimes done there, if it is your risky operation, is your exit strategy. So in the case that we don't reach our goals, how are we going to close up shop? Right. So to go back here, so in your financing plan, there's different types of financial resources you can tap into. So typically at the very beginning of your organization, you call this like love money. So people would put up their own money. Sometimes it's grants as well, or sometimes it's another organization incubating that organization. But you usually start up with a little bit of cash. Then you could go to incubators, and incubators will provide you like business expertise and usually some money as well. This here is more for more capitalist enterprises, but it also still applies to your business angels. So these are people who are just looking for good opportunities. It's your angel investors. Within the social economy realm, there's you could call them angel investors, but they're more like angel organizations because there's other organizations that'll invest in your social enterprises. Yeah, and then you get your startup funding. You can also use venture capitalists, would not recommend. And then at this point, usually you're making your own revenue. But yeah, so if you're starting to get into the like maturity side of things, these are the kinds of things you'd have to go to a bank for, which, yeah, so those would be more likely loans. So the further along you get, the more likely you are to have to take out a loan versus some of the other beginning funding, which is just free money. So common pitfalls. So this is a 101 workshop, so I kind of just glazed over things, some of the things. But yeah, so common pitfalls is not stating your assumptions very clearly. So the core of any good business plan is based off of like solid assumptions, which enable you to do accurate forecasting. So you can think of an assumption as the premise that helps you forecast your future expectations, right? So yeah, you need to make assumptions about, you know, the sales you want to project, your fixed costs, you know, yeah, so these kinds of things, usually you're making assumptions, and as long as you state those assumptions, then people are okay with it. This is something people do in economics a lot. It's annual, you'll probably remember that. And yeah, so then also, so backing up your information. So if you have assumptions, and those need to be based off of facts, right? So having supporting information to back up everything in your business plan. So if you're making an assumption, you need to support it. Usually that's done through feasibility studies, surveys, market analyses. Sometimes it's you actually just going out and getting the information too. And yes, usually that'll be like hyperlinked or it should be hyperlinked into your business plan, as I think, yes, some people, from what I understand, from all the business plans I've written, like proper APA citation is not needed. It's not an academic paper. Hyperlinks are more convenient and accessible. Yeah, and then I guess another thing is sometimes business plans are just a little overly ambitious. So it doesn't really seem tangible. Like it's kind of clear that they're making it up. So, you know, it's a pretty common mistake to kind of omit certain parts, especially in like your startup requirements. So it's also like, it's not enough to just say, we need $40,000. You have to like clearly describe the specifics, so that the reader knows that you've actually done your homework and you're not just like, you know, making these claims out of nowhere. Yeah, so also within that, in your kind of startup action planning, you would mention, you know, hiring needs, possible sources of funding, how they'd be used, and yeah, detail some of the other like more logistical aspects of that. So that is all I have prepared for today.